One of the oldest mechanics in the Empire War Expanded mods is finally getting a long-planned overhaul. Today we're talking about the changes to how we're handling tiers and traits. None of this is a new mechanic, given we're talking about command bonuses and economic bonuses which have existed since the base game, but we made some significant changes to how these are determined and communicated in the Empire War Expanded mods, which should hopefully smooth out some of the issues with our old tier and trait system and be a bit easier to understand. But most importantly, this is set up to be easier for us to manage. Since the earlier, if not earliest, days of Thrawn's Revenge, hero command bonuses have been split into tiers 1 through 5, with tier 1 being the best, occupied exclusively by Akbar and Thrawn, and tier 5 being the worst, giving bonuses to the stats of ships under their command, modified by traits like Ruthless or Defensive, which help characters specialize in different areas. On the economic side, bonuses like Overseer and Admin have always reduced prices or build times, along with a bunch of other effects we've had from traits which we won't get into right now. But each of these sets on the economic and military sides had their own rough edges we wanted to smooth out. Despite being objectively boring and not hugely important, this is a project that's been ongoing for years now, but with the first release of Revan's Revenge, it'll finally make its way into the wild in the first iteration. On the military side, there were a few problems we wanted to address. For one thing, 5 different tiers didn't allow for the most granularity, and in many cases, the relatively large bonuses from traits compared to tiers could mean a character at tier 3 was actually as good as or better than a character at tier 2, or even 1 in many situations, and it's hard for players to know that without knowing certain numbers offhand. So traits should be a modifier on tiers, but they should be a bit more clear in what they're doing. Secondly, but no less importantly, there wasn't really a consistent starting point for how tiers should be assigned to characters. So some characters shot up and down the tiers based on personal feelings of whoever worked on them last, and then lower tiers tended to be treated as the default unless there was a particularly noteworthy reason to improve them, which meant tier reflected visibility as much as anything else in the lore, and there was a bit of an upper limit on how some of the factions which were less prominent in the lore could skew in their hero roster. There's no such thing as an objective way to find the quote-unquote true skill of a commander expressed as a set of buffs in Empire at War or any other strategy game, but what we have done is made things a bit more consistent at least. Instead of 5 tiers, there are now 12 tiers, with each tier bringing up damage, health, shields, speed, and fog of war reveal by 3%, although the specific numbers there may change in the future if we decide certain categories need to scale differently. The tiers have also been made more consistent with other systems in the mod, where now the higher number is better, and then tier 1 is the lowest. So it's 3% across the board at tier 1, and then 36% across the board for each category at tier 12. This keeps the overall bonuses within the realm of what they were before, while giving a bunch of extra room for us to maneuver, and hopefully a lot more clarity on what each character is going to be doing. The way we assign a tier to a hero now is based on their rank. So if they're the captain of a ship, say, we would start by placing them at tier 2. If they're an admiral, that usually starts at tier 6. If they're that faction's equivalent of a supreme commander, they start at tier 9. Then there's a series of modifiers we check for the character. Do people in universe talk about them being particularly scary or talented like Thrawn, Wedge, and Akbar? That would get them a +1. Were they personally responsible for ideas that won an impressive battle? That's +1 as well. On the other hand, were they noted as being mad, incompetent, contributing personally to a strategy which impressively lost a battle, or were they known to only get their position as a political appointee? Each of those would bring a character down a tier. There's a maximum of +2 or -2 for a given rank, but that still means in a 12-tier system, there's a 5-tier range for characters of a given rank. Let's start, for example, by looking at Grand Admiral Thrawn and Grand Admiral Ishin Ilraz. Thrawn starts at 9 as a Grand Admiral, but is noted in-universe as being a brilliant strategist, and we have plenty of examples through his career of battles being won through his effective use of different strategies. That means in-game he will be tier 11. Well, this is the logic for how we assign these tiers. Ultimately, the tier itself is what will show up in-game, not all the reasoning behind it, so you don't need to worry about this. I'm only explaining it so you have an idea if you're interested in how it all comes together. All you have to know is that Thrawn is tier 11. For Ilraz, he starts as a 9 because he's a Grand Admiral, but he's specifically in that position for political reasons, and he's noted as being an untalented commander, which brings him down to a 7. He's still a Grand Admiral, so there's still some value to having him as part of a cohesive command, but he's about as bad as he can be in that position, and that still puts him in a worse position than many just decently skilled regular admirals. We also are a little loose with this in some cases where the functional role a character takes within a faction is given a bit more priority than strictly the name of the rank. For the modifiers, I want to highlight that winning and losing battles alone isn't what gets you the modifier. Sulkang Law, for example, has a pretty impressive defeat in the New Jedi Order at Berleus, and that's the only battle we really have details on for him. But he didn't really think it was a tenable position, and he only did what he did because of his son War Master Savong Law. So in that position, Sulkang probably still ends up with a +2 as a noted brilliant tactician who everyone respects and whose loss wasn't really his fault, while Savong Law would actually be the one to drop from Borleus if he wasn't already going to drop from a bunch of other very bad ideas that he had. And these command ranks are assigned based on how a character fits within the command structure of a faction. So in Fall of the Republic, Jedi would get command tiers because they were acting as generals within the Grand Army of the Republic, but in the New Republic, the Jedi didn't tend to be integrated within the military except for specific characters, so Kian Farlander would have a command tier, other Jedi would not. It also means characters like Gilad Pellaeon will see a bigger change in their command tier based on more than just their kind of rough estimated experience like we used to do with all of his changes throughout the years in Thrawn's Revenge. So this is all stuff that was essentially there already, we just have a more consistent way to pick the actual tier now. These tiers will still be modified by traits, but traits will be a bit less impactful than the 10 to 15% swings in a single stat they used to be in some situations. Instead, they bring 1 or 2 stats, damage, speed, etc., up or down by the value of 1 or 2 tiers. These kind of command-altering traits won't be in for the first release of Revan's Revenge because we're still finalizing the whole list of traits, but the other more utility-centered traits will still be around. Stuff like Slavers giving salvage will still be there, Riot Inciters impacting local partisan loyalty in ground battles will still be there, and so on. You may have noticed though, I said there are 12 tiers, but so far we've not mentioned anything above 11. There's one further factor here: specializations. In some cases, characters will specialize in a specific category or type of unit. Say Wedge Antilles with fighters. Normally, Empire at War will only take the highest buff available, so if you have Wedge and Akbar Akbar's buffs are higher than Wedge's, Wedge's buff ultimately does nothing. But with Wedge specializing in fighters, he always gives an additional tier worth of bonuses to fightercraft, meaning Akbar alone may be a tier 11, but with Wedge's help, fighters are getting tier 12. Another trait which we're still working on is called cooperative, where certain heroes will always be able to bring the overall buff in the battle up 1 tier if someone else is the primary commander. So they may not function as well as other heroes in a fleet on their own, but if they're brought in with someone who's a better overall commander, they're still going to contribute something useful. On the economic side, one of the things that was typically a bit of a problem with admin heroes was that they could really skew a campaign individually. A faction having one good admin hero with a bonus close to 20 or 30% would be moved everywhere, discounting everything a player was building. So having multiple heroes with those kinds of bonuses didn't make all that much of a difference if you were willing to move one of them around enough. The others would just kind of sit there, short of having them in 2 disconnected areas. And then if a faction didn't have them at all, they would be at a significant disadvantage. So to that end, admin heroes are being split into 2 categories, admins and agents. Admins will be bonuses at the higher level, and will generally include faction leaders whose primary role is economic. These admins will generally function as they did before, save that they will go a lot slower through hyperspace, meaning the idea is to plant them in one place, and they'll give a big bonus in that location rather than being a big bonus to everything you're ever going to build. So they're kind of like corporations that can still move and go to any given planet. Agents have smaller bonuses, but are as mobile as anything else, and their bonuses stack with admins, so you can move an agent around everywhere and get a smaller bonus to build time and cost. You can even put them on the planet with an admin and get an even bigger bonus. Some agents only impact a couple specific units, and those agents with their specializations are able to have an admin tier bonus, but just for whatever they specialize in, and that will be noted in their tooltip. Like with military heroes, the type of bonus that economic heroes are given depend on their rank and role within a faction. The long-term idea is to make the admin heroes buildings where you can reposition them anywhere on a cooldown immediately, and allowing us to do some other effects from them, like having a defensive expert who can act as an additional defensive station or something, but that's not in the near-term plans and it may be something that we never actually do. This distinction also helps categorize certain heroes a little more easily. Some heroes fill a mixed military and economic role, like Rufon Tigellinus, who's both a Grand Admiral and a Grand Moff. With this split, rather than just being one of the best military and economic heroes all in one, they have one primary purpose. If they're meant to be a combat hero with a combat bonus, they can't also have an admin tier. Instead, they're limited to a smaller, but still more mobile, agent buff. Hopefully that helps you understand where we're going with hero buffs. Like I said, this has been in the works for a while. I think we first started talking about it in 2021, and it will be turning up in its first work-in-progress phase in Revan's Revenge, before also appearing in Thrawn's Revenge and Fall of the Republic's next release, with some refinements based on feedback from the Revan's Revenge testing. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.